All right. Hello,
Oh,
listeners.
the mayor.
You're listening to Castalgia, the Garbage Town Nostalgia podcast. We got it?
That sounds good.
That sounded.
A little redundant, maybe the Garbage Town Nostalgia Pod.
Okay. All right. Hello, listeners. Welcome to Castalgia, the Garbage Town Nostalgia pod.
Podcast. See, yeah, they're cast on again.
No, it's redundant. You don't.
No,
put
you
cast
don't.
in
You
it
don't say
twice.
cast twice. You already have it.
Did I say cast twice?
No, you were good.
No,
I
you
see
did.
doesn't know what he's doing.
It's the
Okay.
nostalgia pod.
He's over there swiping.
Um,
Just go on.
I'm not swiping. I'm
So,
messaging.
for you Garbage Town citizens, this is the new direction for the Garbage Town podcast. Let me just do the little 2-minute sales pitch here. This is...
I hope it's not 2 minutes.
It's not going to be 2 minutes. Essentially, we are all, we're romantic boys. We like to look to the past fondly. Not the sort of romantic you're thinking of initially, Keenan.
I like the idea. We're just all romantic. We like to take each other out for real nice dinners sometimes.
We're going to talk about all the lovely moments in our lovely lives.
Yeah. So, looking to the past fondly, week after week, one of us is going to bring a different, a different piece of media, a different movie, a different video game, a different, fill in the blank, and we're going to talk about it. The person who brings it up is going to say why it was special to them and the time, and the other Garbage Town crew, the rest of the Garbage Town crew, is going to respond to it with a more, they might have a more critical eye. They might have a more critical eye on what we're talking about.
I'm ready to criticize everything you enjoy.
Dave, it sounds like you're already getting defensive.
Dave, can you?
Well,
relax?
either that or maybe they'll validate how truly good it is.
Yeah.
Anyways, this is episode 1.
Crash Bandicoot. Will
No,
this
this is
be
gonna be
two?
1 because
the
the
Weezer one
Weezer
and-
one's is episode 0.
Oh.
Yeah, that was pre universe
Smart.
reboot.
Very smart.
Yeah, I know.
That is the smartest thing I've ever heard.
Anyways, so I guess we should introduce ourselves real quick. I'm your host, David, and to my left we got,
Hi, I'm Sebastian.
and across from me we got,
Josh.
and to the right of me we got,
Hi, I'm Sebastian.
and to the right of me we got.
Keenan. That's me.
And Kill.
And Kill.
Keenan and
Kill.
So anyways, the inaugural episode, since I'm hosting this cast, I brought the topic to the table, and it's a bit of an unconventional one. I don't normally think...
Doesn't necessarily set a clear tone
Definitely
for the
not.
theme of the podcast.
But
Great first episode.
But considering recent events, I think it's an important one. It's an important one for me, and the one I wanted to start off with. And we're gonna get a little meta here, where I am nostalgic about a podcast this week, specifically IGN's PlayStation podcast, #1 PlayStation podcast in the world, Podcast Beyond.
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 PlayStation Home.
I just love PlayStation.
Josh already picked it up. So, just some real quick background information on Podcast Beyond.
Beyond.
It was
Yeah.
the only member who was with it the whole time, which was a full 7 to 8 years, is Greg Miller, who recently left IGN. Hence,
The end of the cast.
kind of.
It's still going on.
It's as the final episode that he was on, it was entitled "An End of an Era," which is, the most apt description of what was going on. So the cast is still going on, but the format of the cast and who's on it is completely changing from this point forward. But
So
they're
it's-
still going to have Podcast Beyond, their PlayStation podcast.
Okay. Why is it called Podcast Beyond?
Good question.
All right.
A listener actually came up with the name.
I mean, it's a good name.
It's a good name.
When I think
okay.
Beyond, I don't think PlayStation immediately. No. I think it's a sci-fi cast. When you guys are talking about it, I
I'm
thought
more
it
of
was
an Xbox guy, so I don't think of anything when I think of PlayStation except for
Hatred.
No, No, that's going to be on Steam, actually. It should.
Okay.
Good point.
Anyways,
Console wars.
I haven't listened to the podcast the full 7 years, or 7 or 8 years,
He
but
doesn't even know how long it has been running.
it's weird because there's missed weeks and everything. So there's been now 383 episodes.
Wow.
And the last one that Colin and Greg, who are the two people who are on the podcast the most, their last episode was 381. Greg Miller was on the podcast for 346 episodes. And Colin was he joined a little bit later and was on for 246. I think they were exactly 100 episodes apart. Followed closely behind by Ryan Clements, who now works at Sony. Surprise, surprise. Who is on the podcast for 240 episodes. And to me, those three members really made up Podcast Beyond. Greg, Colin, and Ryan. And I started listening about 4 years ago, 2011, I think, when I was a freshman in college. And it's one of those interesting... So, at the time, I had always really liked the Mega 64 podcast, which I've listened to even longer than this one. And at the time, I was just trying to find anything else to listen to that was a podcast, because I was like, wow, I really, really like this medium. And ended up finding... I've been following IGN since I was in middle school. And when I found out that they had a PlayStation podcast, which at the time I think was probably my platform of choice, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. And through that, I came to really love all of the different members that they had on. And normally I don't think I would feel nostalgia towards a podcast. Like, it sort of came to me as a surprise that I would feel that way. But with podcast 381, the last one with Colin and Greg, I came to realize how much that podcast actually meant to me, because it's one of those things where you just take it for granted because it had been in my life. I had listened to these people talk like week after week, never missing an episode for 4 years. And you sort of establish a relationship with those people. Just because, you hear them talk for an hour or two every week. And the thing about podcasts is it's like sitting in on a friend's conversation. It's a very intimate experience. So when this final episode happened, there was a huge amount of emotion behind it. Something I think Josh and Sebas have both seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just watching the way Colin and Greg were talking about the podcast, and I think it sort of came to them as a surprise on how meaningful it was as well. Just in the sense that, it's just something that, a part of their job and something they just did week after week. But it's one of the great things about Podcast Beyond is it's so unassuming. You wouldn't expect it to be this big, communal force, if we could call it that. And it to have all of these, inside jokes that are developed and all of these great segments that were developed over the course of the show. But, just almost by the sheer nature of it just being around so long.
Yeah.
It came into itself, in a very organic and, meaningful way.
Like what you're saying, I assumed that the official IGN PlayStation podcast was not going to be a podcast with a lot of heart.
Yeah.
But obviously, since the only episode I've seen is the last one, which was extremely heart heavy, I don't have a good representation of the entirety of the podcast, but I mean, I was really surprised.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've had a similar experience to Josh's. I've maybe listened or watched a couple episodes, just 10 minutes. When I just know they're going to talk about something that I'm interested in, but I've never been a regular listener at all. But I did watch the last episode. Did you watch it also? Or did you?
Yeah.
And I mean, it was pretty intense how emotional my response to that was.
Totally.
Considering I didn't really know anything about. I mean, it's just so apparent, and I think that's an episode that's definitely worth watching, as opposed to listening to.
Yeah, especially if you're just a fan of
seeing people cry
Yeah.
visually.
Yeah, but also
I really like that.
there's a lot. I think there's a lot of special things with this last episode. Not just as I think it's special as a singular podcast episode in the sense of if you're looking for. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to a new podcast listener, but it is atypical for a podcast.
I mean, I cried watching that.
Yeah.
I do not listen to this podcast. The fact that watching this episode affected me that much, and I have no reason to really care. I mean, it's just so apparent in specifically the body language, the little interactions between Greg and Colin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They just have a very special relationship, and it's also something that I think I responded to personally because it's they have all of us playing music and stuff, we have these relationships where it's professional on some level,
Yeah.
but it's definitely a friendship, and it's the balance of that is always interesting, and it's
And we also just know that feeling, and it's
yeah,
really special.
and it's the kind of thing where because it's I've had this with Special Explosion, where it's I've talked to Jake about this, where it's we get really caught up in the professional side of it, where it's we just we see each other a lot, but it just feels it's because of the band or something.
Yeah.
And then every couple weeks or every month we're wow, we spend every day together, we're very good friends. And it's kind of interesting where it's I have to remind myself that, and I feel in a way them just talking about the fact they're friends, it's such a given. It's so obvious that they're close.
Yeah.
But actually, kind of voicing that through the podcast, I think was it's definitely an emotional thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that's. I have a feeling this might spin off a little bit into just talking about Colin and Greg's relationship or something, but Colin and Greg are not similar. In personality, really. I think you can even see it in the episode. In general, when Greg's on camera, especially, he's a little bit more boisterous. He's a little bit more, he's usually hosting something, so he's, more outgoing, I guess. And Colin's a little bit more reserved and thoughtful. Really thinks about what he has to say before, he'll go out on a limb and say it. But despite their personality differences, they're really drawn to each other. You know what I mean?
It's really interesting, seeing. I guess I've seen stuff that they've done, just IGN videos and things, and from what I would assume about Colin's personality, it seems like he would not like Greg.
Yeah,
It seems like Greg's a little bit
too.
too but then again, Greg, I think, is a very special kind of host and personality, TV personality or web personality, because he does a lot of things that seem like he's very media, TV, media trained and or camera. What's the term you use for that? Anyway,
Yeah, media trained.
but And in a lot of ways, it can seem a little bit superficial at points.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, you can also tell that he is not that guy. Like that was hard for him, probably. He did, like, he still seems kind of nervous. I mean, I had a similar feeling that I do with someone, like, I don't know how I feel about, like, Chris Hardwick necessarily, but, like, he, like, definitely is good at what he does. Like, I could see why a network would want him as a host, because he's professional and, like, is a clear talker and all these things. But at the same time, you're kind of like, this guy, like, is trying to do this. Like, he's not, like, it isn't the easiest thing for him.
Well, and my impressions of him before on the media things I've seen of his...
Of Greg?
Yeah, have been like, oh, he's like a host guy.
Yeah,
he's like
totally.
a smooth, like, loud host guy.
Yeah, and to be fair, like, his position at IGN totally thrust him into that position.
Yeah.
And, like, there's benefits to that. Like, he's mentioned how grateful he is for, like, being in that position and, like, learning to develop those skills, but at the same time, it was, like, this almost, like, sort of corporate decision in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm projecting this on Greg, but for some reason, like, that is initially how I felt. But sometime, like, a little while ago, like, definitely before I had seen his podcast, I started just seeing a little bit of his personality through that. And I just feel like I could tell that there was, like, sincerity and, like, he just seemed kind of like the nerdy guy who happened to get this cool job and is doing it and doing a good job at it. Like, he's doing well, but, like...
I was kind of turned off by the fact that when I watched the... Because I went and watched the Kickstarter or Patreon video for the thing that they're leaving IGN to start. Is it called Kind of Funny?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the way that's edited.
That video, when I watched it, it was just like exactly the annoying host. It's like, hey guys, Greg here. We're starting this new venture. Come on, and join with us. And it's like super cheesy, straight host. And it's like the whole point of this thing is that they're going off on their own indie DIY. It's like, why would you ever use that tone ever again?
Yeah.
It's kind of hard, but also
I get it because
they're trying
that's
to sell
like,
themselves also.
Yeah. I get it because, I mean, it's just cut in that, like, internet way, especially like the way that the cuts like it's a wide shot and then it's like more of like a portrait shot, and like that, I mean, I'm really turned off by that too. But like, what's been good about, like, I mean, not necessarily about like the pitch, but them leaving IGN and starting this thing is, once you get past like the pitch video, which is like, you know, literally
exactly
0.01% of what their content is, and yeah, like them maybe sort of feeling like they have to produce something like that to like pitch themselves, like everything they've been doing is completely off the cuff. Like, cool. There's been no, I mean, I know they plan on doing like more produced stuff in the future, but so far everything they do is like just them being them. I don't know. It's like,
and I mean, it's pretty amazing the Patreon that they have going. Like, it really is. They're the Macklemore of gaming media channels. It's like they're getting like $40,000 a month between those two Patreons.
Yeah,
which is like,
I mean,
there's 4 guys, and I mean, that's like a great living wage for 4 guys.
Totally.
Like, and they're going to be able to put a lot of money into the content. Like, they're totally going to very quickly just become just as big of a production as like the biggest game media companies. And,
I mean, I'm very excited for like the progression that their stuff is going to take. You can definitely still tell like it's in its infancy right now.
Just like the content.
I mean, both in the sense of like, there's not like a ton of it yet, but also just like things feel a little rough in sort of like a charming way though too. But like it's exciting because of it, you know? It's like
Yeah.
and all of like the things that they've proposed to do and like all these show ideas, it's like they can be sort of like really I don't know what the right word is, cuz like stupid or trite isn't the right word, but just like
Really specific and
yeah, or like small in scope
Yeah.
and just like they did this I think they uploaded it like today or yesterday. They did this video where it was one of the guys that quit with them. He was a video guy at IGN named Nick Scarpino. And Nick Scarpino has this very signature looking hairstyle. And it was like it was like sort of just badly filmed, but it was just Nick doing his hair in the morning. And, you know, despite how like small in scope that is, I'm not like, you know, it's not even much of a project, but it's the sort of silly little things you get from doing stuff on your own that you definitely would not get through IGN.
yeah.
And I love IGN. Like, I go to that site all the time. But I think Kinda Funny is way more exciting. And, like, I'm excited to, you know, experience this with them. This is totally, like, getting off the subject of Beyond. But,
I think that's relevant. I think it's really important to talk about.
yeah.
This Nick guy looks like he's just. Oh, this picture's funny.
Oh, Nick
I'm
Scarpino?
looking through his pictures. Most of it just looks like he's got normal hair. He's got slick back hair.
Yeah.
But then there's this one where he looks goofy as hell. I wish I could show this to the viewers, but I'm just going to show Dave and he'll laugh at it.
That is not him.
All right, well, okay. He's very funny looking in that picture. This is
I
him,
was gonna
right?
ask like about the podcast.
Yeah.
That was funny.
Wait, what were you saying?
Is it like typical of podcasts Beyond for there to be like? Because Greg said that he cries a lot on the podcast.
Really?
Is there really like a lot of emotional things on the podcast?
Um,
And like, what context has that been in before?
Yeah, did he cry about Little Big Planet 3?
Is that what it was?
he cries about there being no Patapon all the time.
Did he cry about Last Guardian?
I cry about that.
None of them are like that. They more just interested in what the hell is happening, but neither of them are super tied to that company. But I've seen Greg cry in like other things. I can't specifically recall something in Beyond, but there has been extreme emotions. Like I remember episodes with anger, but I also remember episodes like
And mad at each other?
I mean, just like ranting, I guess. Like not necessarily, but like mutual. It's usually. It's not like they're mad personally at each other, but they'll disagree over something. But also there's just been like the one thing that made that last episode so hard to watch, in terms like. Not that it's like cringy or something,
They
but like
killed a man on the episode.
No, but I mean, just in terms of like, it was really sad to see them leave. Was the extreme highs that they got in terms of like in terms of podcasting, like just some episodes are like extremely funny, and like some of my favorite like podcast episodes of all time, like a really good one is I mean, this is probably like the best example, is when PSN went down like for like 2 months or whatever. I think this was also back in 2011 when I was like, I remember listening to it and this being like maybe my 10th episode or something. And I think IGN told them to... I don't know exactly what the circumstances were, but they all went into the podcast room to do an emergency podcast Beyond about this. And...
Is it live?
Huh?
Is it live?
I mean... It wasn't, like, broadcasted.
Okay.
Sorry. But they all went in, and it was like during a weekend, and they were all like drunk. And the podcast is an extreme mess, and they just like are calling all of these people, like all of these people from like listeners of Podcast Beyond, and all like a ton of great inside jokes came out of that single episode. And it's like, and in the context of it being an IGN podcast, you know, a podcast where they have overhead and
Yeah.
stuff like that, it just makes it that much more special. Like, it's always awesome to see like spontaneity and like genuineness come out of like something that you might not originally expect that to come from.
And it seems like that's where like a lot of the power of this whole podcast comes from.
Definitely. Like,
It could have been the most boring.
Dry
Yeah.
PlayStation podcast.
I mean,
Totally.
it's a PlayStation podcast.
yeah.
That doesn't sound emotional.
And
Right.
it's through IGN, it's just like they're probably getting paid or something.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Yeah, I mean, like it is just a part of their job, you know.
Yeah.
So you could totally see people just phone that in and just be like, "Here's
okay, here's the news.
yeah, here's the game."
But the thing about podcasts is, like, it's so long form and there's so many episodes that, like, you can't do that. You can't keep up those appearances.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't
That's
remember.
true.
Yeah. One thing, I mean, I think my first memory with Beyond, like, for the past couple of years, Dave, every now and then, would be like, Sebastian, you need to hear this one thing. And specifically, it'd usually be something Colin says.
Yeah,
And, but
I got to get the truth out there real quick. Huge fan of Colin. He can be a very controversial figure, but the way he articulates himself, I'm a fan. He has a particular way of speaking that I just find.
yeah, and it was that's kind of what you would talk about a lot with me, and it seemed like when you were showing me a part, it wasn't like when someone shows you a YouTube video or a movie, or like they're like, oh, look at this joke, this part's really funny. It's more like you're like, hey, meet this person, like it's
Yeah.
like you're trying to introduce me to these guys or something, and like, I don't know, that's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. I got that sense from you, from the way you were talking about it, that it was different. It wasn't like, even though you would generally try to show me one specific thing someone said, you would, like, that wasn't the point of it. It was like, hear them talk for a little bit, and you're like,
Yeah.
just listen to the way that they talk and the way they interact and stuff. Yeah, I don't know if that was interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, another reason why that podcast was like, you know, so close to my heart was that podcast has like an insane number of listeners, right? Something like over, I don't know what the current numbers are, but I remember like
30 billion.
maybe 3 months ago or something, it was like 700,000
Wow.
downloads or something, like huge outreach, right? And like this sort of fed into it, but it was also just the fact that like these people who I listen to week in and week out, and like people I sort of like consider role models, and I am just like a fan of these people in general. When I sent in like so after I don't even know if I can say my label since I've handed the keys, but
I should say it's your label.
It's just a new era,
But-
you know, the end of an era.
yeah, yep.
The end of Dave's era.
But ever since so the first 7-inch that Forbidden Seabass Records, the record label I started, released. Wait, oh my God! I completely lost track of what I was saying. But the first record I released on vinyl was Special Explosions, past / future 7-inch, and I sent in a song to them being like, you know, this is my name, from, you know, we're from Bellevue, Washington. This is, you know, my friend's band that I put out on vinyl, and it would be cool if you could play it during, like, they have a segment called Ryan's Wrap Up, where people send in their music and like they'll, they select and play a song every week. And I just like, it was so routine for me to just listen to that podcast week after week that like I remember listening to the episode that song was on, and I got like 30 minutes in or something, and I like the podcast is usually like 50 minutes to an hour and 10 minutes. And then I remembered I was like, I sent the song in. I was like, I wonder, but I had sent it like just a few days before, and I was like, I wonder if it's gonna be on. And like I scrubbed to the end, and I like heard the song, and I was like, oh my gosh. And so then I had to like
Find the beginning.
Yeah. So I didn't even like go back to where I was listening and listen to the whole thing. I just rewound until they introduced the segment.
Yeah.
Just to hear what they could say.
Yeah.
Or what they could say. What they would say. What they did say.
What they could say after hearing that.
And like, I mean, I remember getting, this is pretty stupid because it's just like this little thing, but I was like, I got like, my heart was pounding or something. I was like,
That makes sense.
yeah, I mean, I was like sort of afraid of like what they were going to say or something. But
I know that feeling.
But
totally.
also just excited, and just like that sort of like nervous anxiety that like is not necessarily
Butterflies.
negative. Yeah. And, but like, it didn't go bad.
Yeah.
And just hearing it was like so cool. And
Did you get any orders from that?
yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, like someone sent like, because you can add a message like when you buy something on Bandcamp, someone sent Beyond like with their order.
I mean, those 700,000 listeners.
Yeah, you
got
gotta
us,
at least
like,
get
One of them's
got
gonna
us
like
like
it.
got us like 3 downloads.
But like it was so, I think gaming still has like a stigma, or at least it does for me when like in certain communities and with certain people. But after that happened, I was like, I don't care like that this is a PlayStation podcast. I showed like the people at Ground Zero,
Yeah.
and I was like, listen, like Forbidden Seabass got on this podcast, and like I used the number as like a
Yeah.
justification of being like,
That's what you have to
like
do.
look at this outreach, but like in reality, it was way more about the fact that these people I admire were talking
Right.
about
Totally.
like,
I remember hearing Greg read the letter, right?
yeah,
And I remember like, wow, this is crazy.
yeah.
Because like, and also at that point, like I didn't listen to the podcast at all, but I definitely watched a lot of IGN videos, so I was aware who Greg was, and I knew how much Dave liked Greg and Colin and stuff, and it was like, wow, this is hearing him talk about like saying like your name and talking about Forbidden Seabass stuff was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
And like it just made me feel connected to them in like a way that I thought maybe was like impossible or something.
Yeah.
And I mean it has made me like buy into is not the right word or like phrase to use with this, but like during their last episode, and like Greg mentions how like it's a two-way street with this community, like the fact that it's not like just this corporate thing that they just talk about PlayStation news and people listen to it. It is like there is effort put behind this and like thought,
Yeah.
and there is a resulting community because of it. And like I
Well, it's
totally
like-
feel that way.
It's cool because the community couldn't exist in that big of a way if it wasn't part of a giant corporate thing like IGN. Like they could get pushed into such a big thing. And so it's really cool that something with that big of a listenership is doing like personal things, because
Totally.
so many big podcasts just completely lose that.
Yeah.
Every podcast that I listen to that's one of the big ones, like, you're never going to hear little plugs and even like listener letters and stuff like
Yeah.
they do, and they take a lot of time to listen and make it a two-way conversation.
Yeah, and particularly like with, I mean, you just can't make this stuff up, like, or fabricate that, like, this sort of community feeling, like, because with that last episode, the last episode that they were on, it's so weird to say, like, I don't know how to refer to this episode.
The last one
episode.
you'll listen to?
No, no. But with the last one that Greg and Colin were on, like just watching it, and they're in the big, like, they're in the big IGN studio with like all the screens and stuff. But despite like the really sort of formal setup, like they're a complete wreck during that
Yeah.
episode. Like, and I, like, I mean, I was crying so much during those last, like, 30 to 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, pretty much as soon as, like, when Ryan Clements was on, like, during the appreciation video, or the videos addressed to Greg and Colin, like, that's when it really definitely started. And then when Colin read his letter, oh my gosh, it destroyed me.
It's so interesting. For some reason, Greg crying was more impactful. I mean, well, part of Colin was like, this guy seems like he doesn't cry that often. He's kind of reserved, so I definitely got that. Greg's like final, like the last stuff he says, like right before the end. Like, I remember just thinking like, this is so insane that it's being filmed that it's in this studio, because it just looks
Oh my
like
gosh.
I imagine the crew's just like, oh man, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like he's there just crying so much. Like he's not articulate. Like
Yeah.
he's like,
But that's what makes it so awesome. It's,
No,
it's
yeah, I mean, yeah, it
it's
was
one of
great.
the most honest things I've ever watched.
it just seemed like, yeah. I think what was really affecting about it was just kind of the weird contrast between very professional. How it was shot professionally in the IGN studio,
Yeah.
and this guy's just crying, just like so much, just like weeping on camera.
Well,
talking
I
about
mean,
this
it's
thing.
just like nothing in that was concise. People repeated themselves so many times. Like, it was just, they were caught up in emotion and just like trying to keep going, but they were just too overwhelmed.
Yeah.
There was one moment that in particular that I thought was like really affecting. It was kind of funny. Like it was really weird. Like I thought it was kind of silly when I heard it, but I don't know. For some reason, I kind of like rewatching it. Was Greg's talking about being at some sort of like expo or something with maybe even E3
that part's awesome.
with Colin, and he's like, we got really drunk. Like they went to like an area they weren't supposed to go to, because they weren't that high up at IGN yet at that point. But they snuck in this area that had like a free bar, and they said they poured like whiskey into like a vase or something. And they just got really drunk together, and they said like they were sitting at a table and their IGN logo was on it. And then he was just like, and we both just like looked at this logo and like pounded our fists on the table and was like, talking about how much this means to us. And he's like, at that point, that's when I realized like we were like from this, like we were the same or something. And like he starts, and he doesn't finish that sentence, and like he starts crying and stuff, and just like
What? Greg, I think Greg mentions this in that episode. What's interesting about like Greg and Colin and like a lot of the people who work at IGN now, like what's interesting about their position is when you think about like when these gaming websites were first starting, they didn't have anywhere to look to, right? Like it was a completely new thing. But Greg and Colin grew up like reading EGM and looking at these websites, and they're sort of the first generation of people who are like, I want to do that as a job. Like that's my dream job. And like, so these names mean something to them, and like this is what I want to do, And so, and what makes that so special, or like why I bring that up, is Greg really understands what it means to be on the receiving end of a site like that. Like because, you know,
The user end.
yeah, because he had been a reader, because he had been a podcast listener, he's like, I get it. Like, the listeners and the readers get to know these people. Like, that's totally true, you know? Like, because you spend, you know, a couple hours with these people every week, like, you get to know them. They might not get to know you in such an intimate way, but, like, I feel like I know their personalities really well.
Yeah.
And because Greg understands that, he's able to articulate it in a way where he's like, he understands how it feels like you're their best friend, you know? And that's not, I think a lot of people, like, on the creation end would probably see that as, like, creepy or weird, being like, dude, you don't know me. But, like, Greg gets it. Like,
That is a really special part of it.
yeah, in a way, like,
They seem really well suited for the position. Like, a lot of the times with the person who is the creator in that situation, like, they're a lot less open to the idea of, like, literally being willing to meet any of those hundreds of thousands.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting because like the only like other podcasts I listen to regularly, like something like WTF, I don't get the impression that Mark Maron wants to meet his listeners.
Definitely not all of them.
You know, and like that definitely affects the like part of it. And
You know that it's not like a community. It's not like a two-way thing.
And that's another thing is like something like WTF or one of some of those other like huge podcasts.
Yeah.
It's like if they're like the importance of that podcast, I don't know if like culturally would exist even if there weren't very many listeners. I don't know how to describe it, like because he gets big guests,
Yeah.
and it seems important. Part of the podcast Beyond is like if that podcast did not have that community, that podcast is like it means nothing. Like it's like. It only became what it is because there was a community and listeners. Like they're just talking like I don't know how to describe it, but
Not knowing who that Ryan guy was and watching his video, that was a crazy, creepy video.
I mean it seemed weird. I didn't know
That guy's
and
just
I was like, what's up with it? Yeah,
I'm gonna say something to Greg and Colin.
I was really weirded out by it.
wow,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah,
Man, see for me, I was like, wow, this is the most heartfelt video in
It
the
seemed
world.
like he was doing a gag. He was talking so quiet.
I'm very slow.
It was like he was like
but that is the way he would talk on the cast. So I guess I was just used to it or something. But like,
that guy's a strange way of speaking.
I mean, I remember.
I don't know. I really like it, but like, I'm just like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just, you know,
I mean, my thing at points, honestly,
evangelical podcast beyond listener.
for some reason, the vibe I got was this is a guy who doesn't like them. At first, I'm like,
I was like, oh,
Man,
he's,
that is so
And I
he's
thought-
an ex-caster. with
yeah,
them.
I thought he was bitter.
Yeah.
It looked like he was bitter. Like for some reason, I had it in my head. I made up this whole backstory.
Me
Of
too.
Him getting fired, and he's there, and he's doing this because he just needs to do it, and he's just like. And then after a while, I could tell once they went back. I was like,
For me, he like it just read to me as like deliberate and like sincere or like
I mean, sure it was. Just, I didn't know who this person was. And
Yeah.
And by the end and seeing their response, I could tell like, oh, they have a close relationship with this person.
yeah.
But at first, it was very weird. Also, hearing you describe their relationship with the guy from Sony that called
Shuhei
them,
Yoshida. Yeah.
that was really cool because I thought like, oh, this is just some like corporate call. This guy's from PlayStation. Like, they don't care about each other. But you mentioned that like they actually have a pretty strong relationship, which is
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, he's been on the podcast several times, and like, he's brought like a level. What's truly sort of amazing about that, or about like their relationship with Shuhei, is they've brought this level of like personal consumer interaction into like from a person who is actually really high up at Sony, and it's like helped me feel like Sony's a good company. And I mean in a sense of like it's humanized the company. And like
Humanized IGN too.
yeah, but totally. And because like Shuhei is a listener and engages with the Beyond community, you get super funny Twitter interactions that like them like playing off inside jokes together. And it's like, really, like consumer and president of Sony like joking you know like joking together.
Totally
it's like
weird.
Wow, that like the fact that Podcast Beyond sort of helped facilitate that is like, I mean, it's unprecedented, like
it's like on the same level as Reggie Fils-Aimé.
Yeah,
his consumers
yeah.
like every single video he brings up the "My Body Is Ready" thing, and
Yeah.
I like Reggie. I don't know anything about him really, but
I mean, I think that's pretty important for Sony because like Sony more than Microsoft or Nintendo seemed very faceless to me.
Yeah, totally.
So
I mean,
I don't know.
especially because like
Also, because Sony does so much other stuff.
and I mean they
At
are
least
like
the
a
PlayStation branch. just
Japan.
seem-
I mean, I guess they're. I don't know. I guess
Nintendo
so-
America is still a big part of Nintendo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but when I think of Sony, I think of the Japanese part of it. But I guess
Yeah.
when I think of Nintendo, I think of Reggie, and I think of
But what about
the Ameri-
Kevin Butler, you guys? I mean, he was a great mascot for Sony.
Who is
it
that?
was.
Who is that? That's the guy who did those dumb commercials where he was like.
He was a white guy with slick hair.
Yeah, and I actually
Yeah.
liked the guy that I liked the guy that did their press conference for when the PS4 like just trounced Xbox One, like at that E3 press conference. You guys remember
Who
this?
was it?
Jack Trenton.
I don't know.
I thought you were gonna talk about the giant enemy crab one when they announced the PS3 and they were showing off that game and it's
And
been
then they were
repeat-
like $5.99.
yeah, $599 from this. It's like the same video as a $599 US. There's like it's just this one clip that people always play, and it's of somebody showing off a game, and he goes giant enemy crabs or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, this
Because that was a good press conference.
the Jack Trenton one was like it was after Microsoft's press conference, and they were like $400. You can play used games. Like they just did everything right that Sony did wrong.
Microsoft.
Wait, sorry,
Microsoft did wrong.
Beyond.
Beyond.
Yeah,
That's how we reset.
And I mean, I think that was probably part of me liking him on stage, was just being like, wow, this is like a crazy press conference. But I mean, I'm not saying Beyond did all of this, but like, you definitely see Sony these days way more in touch with their user base than they used to be. And now they're like, indie developers, come work with us. Like, we will put your game on. We want games on here,
I mean, it's been pretty like. The PS4 is the first Sony console I've had, and like, it's pretty impressive. I mean, the console's not that impressive, but the like.
PT is.
PT is, yes.
PC is very impressive. Yes.
I mean, I'm
PC
starting to like the
Master.
console a lot more, but also just seeing like, I feel like with PS Plus and there's a lot of other things, like Sony does seem to be a pretty like consumer-minded company, and also what they're doing for indie games in particular is like really interesting.
Yeah, totally.
Like a lot of indie games are debuting on PS4, which like
Yeah.
it's pretty surprising.
I mean, like, I've had my issues with the PS4, but I love like the Sony ecosystem, mostly on the whole. Like, Vita is totally like an amazing handheld. Like, it might be my favorite handheld of all time. And that's
what about
not
the Game Boy Color, man? You didn't.
that's
Or no, wait, the Game Boy Advance is
What
actually.
about
better.
Game Boy Advance is really good.
What about the Game Boy camera?
Yeah, what about the Game Boy printer?
Yeah.
Game
Come on,
Boy
the Game Boy
SP.
printer was the greatest.
Actually, can we still consider
Handheld.
the Virtual Boy a
Nope.
You've never played one of those. don't even pretend.
Anyways, but like, it's not because of the Vita's library, but the Vita has access to so many like indie games and the backlog of like PS1 games and everything, and it's just like it's just like a really nice piece of hardware, and I'm like, this thing is amazing. I like Sony's stuff, but like, you know, PS4 probably needs to step it up a little bit.
There was just like a system update, and it's working better, definitely.
Nice.
That's
There
good.
you go.
Still can't get internet for some reason.
I mean,
Wi-Fi is not working.
I mean, I'm not convinced. This is I'm not convinced that like that the PS4 is necessarily going to stay bad, or like these games are going to keep on being released broken. I hope that like companies are seeing what's going on, and maybe we should wait. Maybe we should wait and actually release games like when, you know, release games and system updates like when they're ready to go.
Yeah. I don't want to. I hope this might seem a little bit irrelevant. I don't want to get too off topic, but
say tangential, and then it's okay.
Okay. We're just talking about the way that like the format of a podcast is really special in developing like relationships between the listener and the content creators and stuff. Josh and I have been talking quite a bit about the comedian Harris Whittles, who died recently, who's a writer for a lot of shows, and like, it's interesting because like the response to his death was a lot bigger than I expected. Like I'd watched videos of this guy and stuff, but I didn't know why many.
He's
people,
a writer. It's like he isn't really in the public eye.
Yeah, I mean he's not an actor. He has not been in anything. I mean he has like a tiny part on Parks and Recreation, which he writes for, but he's a writer. Like he's not a recognizable face at all or name. But like in the couple of weeks before he died, I had happened to like watch quite a lot of videos or listen to podcasts with him. But then after like seeing people write about him, I didn't realize how active he was in the podcasting community. Like he did quite a bit, like with Comedy Bang Bang, and like he had a couple podcasts, and it kind of that made like the response to his death make a lot more sense to me. And like because a lot of what I read, like I think the AV Club posted like an article about him dying, and like all the comments were like really long, really heartfelt, sincere things about how sad people were about it. And it was really interesting to me. I was like, wow, this writer.
Yeah.
And then I realized it's because like these people, through listening to podcasts with him, just felt like they knew him really well.
Yeah, totally.
And like, I don't know. It was like,
you
it was
get to know a person's personality in a way that you don't with anything else, because it's like when you're on a podcast, you're not like playing a character most of the time.
Yeah.
Unless you're on Comedy.
Unless you're playing
which
Cake
he was
Boss.
often.
Yeah.
But
Cake Boss.
like because of that, like a writer, like you said, who never had any public face, like millions of people came to love him. Not millions.
Like
Billions.
1,000
Like
people.
maybe 1,000.
But like, it was also just one of the
More
most,
people than love me.
That's all that matters.
That's all that matters.
but
That's why I had to go.
like specifically reading all the things
I killed him.
all the things that like a bunch of strangers are writing about him, like on the especially it was that AV Club article where they're all the like AV Club comments are like the worst thing ever usually, but here was everyone being very serious and like heartfelt, and like it was just in a way that I hadn't seen for other celebrity deaths really, and it was because instead of saying, oh, I loved his movies, I loved his show, it was like, I really miss him.
Yeah, or yeah, you know, it's not people like, oh, he worked on that, man, that sucks. You know.
Yeah, like people didn't even like.
Because he didn't even work on anything that I cared about, and I was still sad when I listened to those podcasts.
Yeah, well, for me, it was kind of weird. It was kind of weird because like I do watch Parks and Recreation, and I did like Eastbound and Down. So I kind of like, but whatever. Like, I mean, when I watch it, I'm not consciously thinking
You don't know
Harris
which
Whittles
jokes are
wrote
his.
this, you know.
I bet this was a Harris joke.
But yeah, like seeing all these people talking about the fact that they felt like he was a friend and all these things was really interesting. And sorry, yeah, I didn't want to, that was maybe off topic, but just kind of, I feel like this podcast is not just about Podcast Beyond, but it's also about the format.
It's also
of podcast.
beyond
Yeah,
that.
definitely.
It's kind of
Goes far
Yeah.
beyond.
It's beyond Podcast Beyond, you know,
Beyond,
and stuff.
Yeah,
And like,
beyond.
Beyond.
Beyonce.
Anyways,
I had one last question about
Yeah.
the podcast. Do you think that now that it's over, Greg will still retain the rights to the Oreo review videos.
Yeah, those are always him.
IGN.
Well, those kind of
That-
funny.
that wasn't a Beyond production.
So those will still go on.
Yes.
Okay, that's
Wait, is that on Kind of Funny? Is that a Kind of Funny thing?
Was it on IGN before?
What about Snack Taku?
No.
Was he ever guest for that?
Dave, I have a quick question before we leave. Will you continue listening to Podcast Beyond without your boys?
I will. I really, Marty's taking over. Marty Sleva. I've listened to him on. He always guests on different IGN podcasts, so I've heard him quite a bit, and I really like him. And he's one of my favorite writers on the site. He's joined by Max Scoville.
I like Max.
Is going to be his co-host.
Really?
Yeah, not a lot of people like Max, but I think I like Max.
I
he just seems to like what he does.
I don't have much of a tie with him, but we'll see in 4 years if that will change. But yeah, I've listened to 382 and 383 just came out today, so
I think
I'll continue to listen.
a good, maybe, unless you have anything else, a good way to end the cast. We three take bets on how long David keeps listening to the cast. The podcast beyond.
I think
Sebastian.
I'll give, honestly, like 4 more episodes.
Are you serious?
Wait, and
you
then
are way
stop.
underestimating this.
4 more episodes that he'll listen to regularly. Like, I think he'll skip a week in the next. Fine, so I'll take that back. Dave will skip a week in the next 2 months.
So let me give context to this. I still listen to NVC every week, Nintendo podcast every week, and that's never had.
Okay,
Colin and
I take
Greg.
this back. Dave's never gonna stop listening to Podcast Beyond.
So he's the top
But
end.
but I have stopped listening to GameScoop.
Okay, Dave is gonna. I think in the next 2 to 3 months you're gonna not be listening very much.
Okay, what's your answer?
I'm gonna take down IGN so he can never listen to it again.
So how soon will you be doing that?
Immediately.
Okay,
At
Right.
this moment.
So
Can I change my answer now?
Keenan's at immediately. Sebastian's at 2 to 3 months. I'm gonna Price is Right this, and I'm gonna go with
You can't
1
help.
day. So if it's
Today
at any
is the last day.
time, if it's at any time under Sebastian's, I win.
Don't I win?
Realistically, though, I bet David's gonna fall off within the next month. I agree with what Sebastian initially said.
4 more episodes.
Okay, my real answer though, I think he's just gonna keep listening to it. He likes PlayStation. and
Dave
that's-
takes the bus.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's
Takes-
a good podcast name. Let's call this
run
Dave
out
Takes
of
the Bus.
podcasts every week, and I listen to like 6 different gaming podcasts. You guys have this completely wrong.
Okay.
We'll see how much you like Marty in a month, buddy.
Do you guys
Okay.
want to
the Marty Month Challenge?
do you guys want to bet how long I'm gonna continue listening to Beyond Podcast?
Yes, I will bet that Keenan will listen to it until it ends.
Yeah,
Keenan's
10
gonna
years.
listen to every single one.
Yeah.
Very committed fan.
I've never listened to any of them.
Beyond,
Beyond.
beyond,
Beyond.
beyond,
Yeah.
Beyond.
Beyond.
Beyonce,
Beyond.
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 Beyonce,
Beyond.
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 Boing.
Meow.
Boing.
Meow.
Beyond.
Hey, did you know that
Boing.
jet fuel can't melt steel beams?
What?